Welcome to Zen and the Art of Homeschooling. Today we're talking once again about collaborative homeschooling, and we're going to finish our discussion about science. We started it last time. Today we're going to talk about the specifics of how we did science, how science was planned, how the day looked when we did science, how often we did science. We're going to talk about some of our favorite activities that we did in science that made big impressions on ourselves and our children. We're going to talk about some resources that we've used just to help you to navigate how you might want to do science. We'll start with Suzanne talking about the planning of science.
I'd like to talk about the process of planning, how that came about. There were different phases of planning. One phase of planning was to brainstorm general topics that we would like to learn about. And oftentimes that was a topic that I was interested in, or we had some adult or someone available who had special expertise. So we would sort of choose something based on the resources we had. But oftentimes it was talking to the children, the students who were in the class, and their interests guided our list of topics that we would talk about. We did do with, I think with younger kids, or I don't know, at least when we started doing this, it seemed easier to be able to jump around to different topics week to week. And certainly you can still do that with older students, but especially with older students. And when I say that, I mean, middle school or maybe, middle grades, middle elementary and up. It's easier to keep, one focus for at least a few weeks or maybe even a few months. Sometimes we would go almost a year, or at least 6 months on one topic. And oftentimes we would give like a list of options and let the kids talk about what they were excited about. And it does seem to me like, yeah, some kids like certain kinds of science better than other kinds of science. It seems like you've got the kids who like the cars and the gears and that stuff, and then you have kids who are super interested in the life sciences. So that was sort of like step one, is coming up with some of the themes or topics that we wanted to focus on for at least a few months. And then after we came up with those topics, then oftentimes we would meet as maybe two parents and flesh out some of the exact um, learning concepts or topics that we wanted to discuss or teach or explore. One resource that I find really helpful for that process is just the table of contents of science books. So if, and in fact, you can even go on Amazon and use the look inside feature for that. So find a textbook that seems about the right level you want. I guess I should say it doesn't even have to be a textbook, but find a book that is about the right level and then look inside, find the table of contents, and just see what are all the subtopics under that topic. Certainly there are other ways you can do that, looking on Wikipedia, all kinds of ways you can do that. But I found the table of contents a somewhat systematic way of seeing the various subtopics. And then we roughly plan out what we might do each week, but it's fairly rough. And then start brainstorming for topics or brainstorming for activities to do.
I think it helped a lot to have one person kind of doing the overarching um, vision for a big section. And I think that was mostly you, Suzanne. And as someone who collaborated with you, it was very helpful for me to step into the planning process with already kind of a a plan, at least an overarching vision of how things were going to progress. Maybe not all the individual topics per each day set up, but that we'd like to kind of cover chemistry in this parts of chemistry this next 3 months or something like that, and that helped a lot to kind of bring it down to something we could be more concrete with. I think trying to hash that out, uh, science is so big that trying to come up with an overarching plan like that through committee might be a lot harder. It was just as a collaborator, it was helpful to come in that way, to have it already kind of mapped out.
I like to cook, and so I one of the ways that I've successfully cooked with my husband is there's always a chef and a sous chef. So I think that that was something that we did as we collaborated, Gary, that um, oftentimes I kind of came up with some of the topics or subtopics that we were going to talk about. And then you and I would often divide them up and say, okay, well, you're going to kind of be in charge on this week, and I'm going to be, I guess in my analogy, the chef on this week. And then we'd help each other, but it was kind of clear who was leading it, even though there was a lot of help and collaboration.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of times there was um, even the person who came up with the ideas and the map for a particular day might not even be the one that does most of the activities. There was really a sharing of all parts of that, and like you might come up with the overarching idea for a day, and then I'd say, oh, I just read about an activity and it's really cool. I really want to try this out, and so I'd spend a bunch of time putting that together and that kind of stuff. That was a nice interaction, collaborative interaction too.
Yeah, for sure. We would take the lead, but then there's definitely space for
Yeah,
another cool activity.
yeah,
So I'd like to get into the nitty gritty of planning one day or one afternoon. We normally would meet one afternoon. I guess sometimes we did morning, but at one about half day. We probably met for 2.5 hours. Maybe it was three if we put in, or three or longer if we put in snacks and socializing. But I would say the science, we were often busy with science for over 2 hours. And so, in planning something that lasts that long, obviously we wanted to keep the kids' attention. So, we wanted to come up with a variety of activities that they could do. And we provided activities for them, for the most part, uh, enough activities that they had choice in what they did. So a lot of what we did was coming up with various centers that they could choose from and float freely from one to the next. And so they could do an activity, stick with it longer if it was really compelling for them, if there was a lot to learn. Or they could do the activity and say that was enough and move on to the next one. So certainly that all the kids did not do all the activities. There were days when a certain kid maybe only did one of the activities. Um, so, so I guess I just wanted to say that first so that you understood that as I talked about the planning. So I think I boiled it down to like almost a formula when I was planning my science club days, and I would come up with the subtopics. And honestly, I usually had a little more of a subtopic than, like, I had a couple options basically. And then I really pretty much Googled hands on and then fill in the blank. So I'm looking at a schedule here and it says simple machines. So I probably Googled hands on simple machines, and let's see, this was 20, probably 17 or so. So I probably had a couple middle elementary students, a couple middle schoolers, and a couple early high schoolers. I would take a guess. And so I wanted to find maybe a couple simple machine activities for sort of targeting younger and sort of targeting the older end of that range. So I might say hands-on simple machines elementary, or hands-on simple machines middle school. And I have to say I had a lot of success with that. I found a lot of wonderful resources just with that search. And it was fun to browse through them and see which ones I thought would be compelling. It was fun to see, well, I guess sometimes I would see the activities that were available and say, oh, forget it, we don't have the materials for that. But it was heartening to see that if you keep looking. There's so many activities that can be done with just household items. So, trying to think of any specifics that we did with the simple machines. I know we did, some physics stuff with some toy cars. So we had some racetrack and some Matchbox cars from when our kids were younger, playing with them, and we, tipped the racetrack up, and we used a camera to time the Matchbox car going from the beginning to the end. And one of the kids in our group had a lot of video editing interest and experience, and so somewhat inspired by him, we picked apart the video and used that as in a school. I think that they would use some more expensive equipment with photo gates and so forth to really measure the amount of time that it took for the car to go down the ramp really accurately. But we were able to measure it very accurately just using our cell phone camera. Okay, I got off on a tangent there with that one. So I would collect, and getting back to planning for the day, I would collect maybe 5 different activities. And again, like if Gary was working with me, he might come up with a couple that he thought was really fun. We'd pare them down a little bit. I would say maybe we would prepare about 4 activities each time. It depended how big they were. If they were super short, might be another one. And then I always liked to include something that had a little bit of a surprise factor, something that had a little bit of extra fun, or I don't know, some kind of wow factor. A lot of times it was a snack, wasn't it, Gary?
I was looking through one of our the first focus on the chemistry of food, and we did a ton of stuff that day, but we ended with making your own ice cream in a Ziploc bag. So that kind of stuff.
Again, you don't need an ice cream maker to make ice cream. You just need some Ziploc bags and some ice and salt and cream and sugar and some flavoring. So that was definitely a popular day. Yeah, so something like that. When I was going to be the one leading that day, I would do some reading, and that was a good amount of reading, like at least an hour of reading. Depending on the topic, it might be several hours of reading, so that I could absorb the concepts myself and really understand what I was going to be talking about with the kids. And we would typically start each day with me talking about a bit about what we were going to be learning about that day, introducing the subject, asking the kids what they already knew about that subject, talking about some of the big concepts or big ideas. And then after I would talk, then we would explain what the various centers were and set them off to choose which one they wanted to do or which ones they wanted to do.
Yeah, I think one special thing about the science club that might make it different than like a typical co-op, and we can talk about the differences of that another time. But in terms of homeschooling language, there people do co-ops, or people come together to work to do school together. A lot of times, one time a week. What the science club, the difference is that a lot of times with these science clubs, there were many parents that stayed. And a lot of classes is just kind of a drop off, that the kids get dropped off. But in our science club, and especially when they were little, most of the parents stayed around. So when you would be leading this activity, and it might be a couple leaders, but then parents would take over different sections of when the kids broke up and did different activities. So a different parent would be in charge. And that really, the kids had a lot of support then from the parents, because many parents were there. And the other thing it gave me was just a sense of what was happening in science. So I would sit there and I could listen to the lesson also, and then I could take that during my week and when we weren't in science and maybe accentuate on some of those things that they learned, because I was there and able to hear and learn myself. That was a really important thing.
Right. So when I came up with activities, or Gary or whoever it was planning came up with activities and kind of set them up at the centers with materials, um, on my great plan ahead days, I would have little note cards that would explain what was going to happen. On my less prepared days, I might have a post-it note stuck in a book, and the book had the activity, or the, I had books checked out from the library about various science activities, or maybe it would have even just been a website to, like, here, look on the phone. So there were various levels of um, preparation that happened. And so it was apparent, I would decide ahead of time which activity that I wanted to lead, and then the parents who stayed could lead different activities, sit at the station, and help by troubleshooting or asking questions or just learning along with.
Yeah, and I would say that really increased the amount of material that could be covered in a day too, because those each of those stations could be fairly complex or hard for a group of a small group of kids to figure out. But with a parent being there, they could get through the initial part of it really quickly and really learn what they were there to learn fairly quickly. And so a lot of material could be covered quickly, even though the parents, before they showed up, might not know anything about what was going on. They could help the kids um, and themselves learn more about that particular activity. And there was a lot of stuff that got covered in that those activity times.
Right. It didn't have to be so planned ahead in terms of what different parents would do. We just kind of come and you would tell us about the topic and who wants to do this and who wants to do that, which parent wants to help and which kids. And that was the other thing. There was a lot of choice for the kids. And you can talk about that in terms of what activities they can do. Like you said, you planned activities and chose some were for younger kids, some were for older kids, but it wasn't exclusive that just the younger kids did the younger kids projects or the older kids did the older kids projects. They were allowed to choose one that they were interested in, even if we thought maybe it was below their level or above their level. And that gave a lot of autonomy to the kids. Also, that and that they might move around to all of the topics too, or they might just stay at one. They really got interested in one and they could stay there. So there was just a lot of flexibility, and that all wasn't planned for. We just knew that sometimes it was, usually it was a lot of times it was a surprise in terms of who liked what and what activities were really caught kids' attention or different kids' attention. And that, even though you tried to plan for that, it was, not always predictable.
Yeah, it often, I think, to the planners felt a little bit chaotic how different things were going and how it was panning out. But in the end, a lot of kids did a lot of things, and it might not have been in the particular order or anything like that that we expected, but um, a lot happened. I think a lot of learning happened during that time, even though it might have been uncomfortably chaotic at times.
Yeah, I have a specific example, just getting back to the simple machine. So we worked on gears one day, and I really like hands-on materials for science because different, and I've said this before, but a different person can look at the same demonstration and get different things out of it. So we had an old toy that was like magnetic gears onto a surface, and it was designed for preschoolers, I think, and you would turn one gear and then you would place some other gears near it. And so for an early elementary student, it was a lot of just playing with the gears. But for our older students, we could start talking about gear ratios. And so you can be looking at the same thing at the same time as the first grader, but as a sixth grader, you can start to wonder about things like, okay, so I see that the smaller gear is going faster and the larger gear is going slower. How much faster is it? And why is that? And so you can start asking questions that even get into being able to calculate in a quantitative way what gear ratio is. And so if you're talking a little bit about gear ratio and you're looking at the gears, a lot of different ages and a lot of different science levels can get something out of it. So I tried to be pretty careful when I was introducing the various activities, the options to the children. I tried to be careful to not like put an age limit on any of them, because I oftentimes was surprised by how much my older kids learned from doing the activities that in my mind I had thought would appeal more to the younger children, and vice versa. A lot of times the younger children have a special interest in something, or they just really enjoy the thing that I thought was going to be for the middle schoolers or high schoolers.
Kids teaching other kids is a really important way that kids can learn. And I used that in the classroom. I was a teacher. I had kids combined together. In a homeschool environment, you have kids with really different ages that can combine together to teach each other. And that's one of the magical things that can happen when you're doing these activities, and you maybe have a third grader and an eighth grader doing the same activity together. And it's not always, the eighth grader that's just teaching the third grader. The third grader with his or her questions can help open up the eighth grader to thinking about different things. And so that's all possible when you put these multi-age kids together and you don't just segregate them what kind of learning they're going to do. It's been beautiful to watch over the years.
And I really like giving an opportunity for children to choose which activity they want to do. I really think that helps to engage the students if they have say in what they're doing. And I know, Ollie, you maybe wanted to talk about that later. You wanted to discuss what happens if someone's not on board or not in the mood to do something. And I think that happens less when there are a number of activities to choose from. And some days you're just not in the mood to do the activity where there's a lot of detailed observations and writing down numbers and stuff like that, and you just want to do the one where you can kind of sit there and absorb what you can. That's a little easier, and that's fine. And this model gives room for that to happen.
I want to go back to a little bit specifically. We did science about 3 times a month throughout the school year, and we did science for about 2.5 hours a week each of those times we met. And so just people thinking about it, planning this in a school setting, you think about, well, at least in middle and high school, science happens about every day. You do a science class for about 45 minutes a day, 5 times a week. You do that throughout the school year, and that's your science. And the way we were doing it, there's probably less time. I mean, you think about, but a lot of that time in school, even when you're doing it every day, there's a lot of transitional time. And so in terms of the amount of science kids get, it's a lot less than that. So you can think about that if you're worried about kids not getting enough science. And compacting it into one day. And some schools actually do this, and there's not some schools that do this, that you have one class and you have it for a longer period of time because it gives you that focus. So instead of just having a little bit each day, you're having a big focus of it. And so that's kind of how we did it. And we were able to cover an awful lot in that time period. And even, Suzanne, when you did high school science 1 or 2 times a week for a chunk of time, a couple hours, you were able to cover a lot in that it can look different is what I'm trying to let people understand, that it doesn't have to look like it looks in a school, to be able to cover lots of topics and to really go in detail. I don't know if you guys have any comments about that.
I guess maybe just as an example, I could just go over what one day would look like. If I had mentioned the first day of the chemistry of food, let me just say what we did that day. I found the write-up I did. So we started with a quick brainstorm of what people know about chemistry. The answers ranged from very basic concepts to more advanced and esoteric ideas. Then the kids concentrated on exploring physical and chemical properties. We had a range of materials set up for a number of properties, such as color, odor, magnetic, conductance, hardness, density, mass, volume, melting point, viscosity, rusting, interaction with acids and bases, kind of stuff. The kids were tasked during this activity time not with not only exploring the given property across materials, but how one might compare or even measure the property of those materials. Then we wrapped up the day with everyone making their own batch of ice cream. So that was a lot of stuff to do in one day, all those different properties and actually exploring them. And I think that was probably a typical 2 hour, 2.5 hour day.
That was a great day. That was a fabulous day and um, memorable. And I think that that's one of the ways that we can do sort of more with less as homeschoolers. I know, Gary, for years my oldest son Aaron remembered, like pouring, I think, like honey and syrup. I think it was honey, maybe in Karo syrup or something, on a board that was slanted. Just watched him drip down, or how long it would take him to
Yeah,
pour.
just timing it. I remember that day. The
Yeah.
viscosity of things. Yeah.
Right. When I would look up activities, find things that looked interesting on the web to do, I pretty much ignored the how many class periods will this take? Because I mean, I think I routinely planned stuff for 1 2.5 hour period that probably, if I had looked at the recommendations for in school, it would have taken, I don't know, like 2 weeks of every day. And that doesn't mean that every kid is doing all of that, but it gives enough options, and when they get into something, then they can kind of the interest of it pulls them along to do more, and they get into it and they stay invested. So they really can do a lot, actually, in an hour and a half or however much time.
And I guess I would add that when you have a lot of different things going on in a lot of different groups, if even if the kids don't do everything, they're watching what other kids are doing, and maybe one kid won't do that viscosity thing of watching Karo syrup slowly roll down, but they'll see that that's happening, and you can get a lot by just watching for a few minutes what other kids are doing, and I think having those a bunch of different stations like that allowed a lot of learning to happen at once.
One of the important things we did is you guys would have a wrap up at the end of science club. So there was the introduction, there were the stations that kids went to, and then we'd come back together and it'd be a wrap up. So even if everybody didn't get to every station, they got to hear at the end other people's account of what happened there. And so it kind of was all brought together in a really nice conclusion for everyone. I think another thing that people might get worried about is how do you choose from the variety of science topics out there. So we've got plant biology, animal biology, chemistry, physics. How do you choose what to do? And so how did we choose what to do in those? And how did you make sure that kids are getting exposure to different topics? I know one of the things we did do, we haven't talked about yet, is before the school year began, many times in August, we'd have a gathering where and a number of times it happened at a pool, which was really nice. We gathered and the families all came together. And Suzanne, you would present some ideas for topics for the year. And then we could brainstorm as families, like, okay, I know about this topic, or I know about that topic, or this seems interesting. So that's one of the ways we did it, that we kind of came together and just, you didn't present, what wasn't every idea was on the table, but you had like, I'm really interested in this or this, and how could we do this? And then everybody kind of brainstormed together. So that was one of the ways we did that. So just talk a little bit interesting, how do you pick these topics and make sure that the kids were getting exposed to many different topics. And I know what the thing is, one of the things is trusting that it's going to happen over multiple years, which is what happens in school too. So I don't know if either of you have a little bit on that topic.
For some time, I started following the classical education model, and so I, like, one year I would do more physical science, and then another year would do human body and, a more biology focus, and then we would do some chemistry and some earth science. So I'm not exactly saying the classical cycle, but I looked to that to make sure that over the long haul we were covering each of the topics. Honestly, what I found with that is that there were kids who then really liked 1 year of science club and not a different year. In other words, 1 year on, say, everything biology seems a little bit too much. What worked, I think, for kids was when we had a little bit more variety per year. One of the things that we did was use like the fall and spring to do some more biology work, and then use the winter months to do either chemistry or physics or something where the activities would keep us indoors more. And that seemed to, I think, make it so that at the end of the year, each kid at least had a section that they had really been into. With that said, you can also do physics outside. There was 1 year we did lots of biking around Whetstone Park and measuring our time. And I think that was the year we even worked on relativity. There's this great book on relativity for kids. And I don't know, I think maybe they can understand it better than us adults who are stuck in our ways and only thinking about our own experience in the world, our own observations.
I remember when I first joined the science club that we were trying to do big topics, like you mentioned, Suzanne, the classical kind of, we'll do chemistry this year, and I think you're absolutely right that by the end of when I was doing science club, and how you were breaking it up into some physical and some biological, and it really did, at least for my kids, bring them in more for for at least part of it, because there were some things that didn't, some whole years that didn't click for some of my kids, and but by the end it was definitely they were engaged with more, and if you don't know that the whole year is going to be about a particular topic that's something you're not a big interest in, then you're going to be paying more attention. If this is only going to last for a month or so, then it's easier to do it. One other thing I wanted to mention about that first meeting of the year was one thing that I thought was very valuable. Is we started off with a discussion about what worked the previous year, and what didn't work, and I think we learned a lot from other parents' observations of their kids and what they thought they connected with and what they didn't, and to really get an idea of what we could do better the next year. I thought that was really helpful.
I also wanted to say that our planning left a lot of space for flexibility. So in retrospect, I now have a list of all the topics, say for this year that we covered. But that doesn't look the same as the list I had at the beginning of the year when I was thinking about which subtopics we were going to talk about, because we would sort of flesh out generally the subtopics we were going to talk about, and then we would get to one and say, whoa, we got so into this that we didn't have time to get to the next thing. So actually, we're going to push that to the following week. And so either everything got pushed out another week, or maybe we chose some things to skip. So there was a lot of the plan, as I have it now on paper, was a lot of times just writing down what we actually did do after the fact.
And one of the things in this too is that at the end of the year, we did like a wrap up. And that was really a fun thing that we called it the Science Club Potluck. And so what the kids got to do, and probably the last month of the year at home, is they got to dive deep into a topic that they were interested in and learn about that. And it could have to do with something we did in science that year. It could have to do with something else. And actually didn't even have to be about science. If the kids were interested in some other topic, they could choose another topic and come and present about that. But it was a time where the kids could come, and then we would have a big science day. It would be more than 2 or 3 hours, I think, that day, where we'd come and the kids would present one by one their topic, and they could present it in various ways. I mean, they could do a standard threefold cardboard way of describing it and showing it, or they could have a video or just talk or present it in some other way. And we'd do that, and then we'd have a big potluck where everybody ate food at the end of it. And I think most of the kids came away from those feeling really good about what they had learned. So they got to come and share it and get that feedback, again, from a multi-age group of people. That feedback, affirmation of what they learned. And some of those things really stick with me. Of course, Aaron, Gary's son Aaron, talking about car crashes and how cars were safer now. And I mean, that has stuck with our family through many years. One of the other girls, Chloe, when she talked about lightning strikes and how we were supposed to crouch down. And I mean, I don't even know how long ago that had to have been. I think over 10, 12, that was one very at the very beginning, and that has stuck with me. But all those things have stuck with my kids. So what they shared, they felt really good about. So I don't know if you guys have other things to say about Science Club potlucks.
I would just say they were awesome. It was so much fun to just watch kids. And I'm not sure that every kid presented every year or anything like that. They had a choice. If they didn't want to do it, that would be fine too. And but it was so much fun to see what kids were interested in, and everybody was always interested in watching these presentations. I just remember the first science potluck, my 4-year-old, we chose this experiment where she put a raw egg in vinegar and just let it sit there for, I don't know, it was 10 days or something like that. And then she brought it out as her science potluck thing. And it just fascinated everybody in the group to go up and touch this egg that had now, the calcium had been dissolved, so it was now squishable. It was just so great to see. And she was so excited that everybody was excited about her project too. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have a great picture of Finian, so he must have been like second grade, talking about blue whales he had studied about that year. And so I have all the kids, I have it actually on our website, of all the kids on the steps, because he had put his big blue whale exhibit on the wall going up the steps. So we have all these kids and kids of various ages, much older than him, just sitting there listening intently, and him being able to share what he learned about blue whales. And that was really important to him, to feel valued and to be able to share what he learned. And he learned things that other people didn't know who were much older than him, and that made him feel really good. So I know a lot of people are interested in, where do you find science activities. So Suzanne's going to talk a little bit about that. Um, and on our website, we'll put up some different resources that people can use and look for. I know one of my favorite books that I just have to give a shout out for is Smash It, Crash It, Launch It. I'm not sure if that's the exact title, but I didn't get it. But it's one of the books my kids, all three of them, loved that science book. Because it just is all sorts of activities. And one of the science club potlucks, one of the kids weren't we doing eggs off our second floor porch and dropping eggs? And so that was one of the activities. And I know there were some where you were like throwing eggs or into sheets or something. We did some of those, but that book has a lot of really fun activities in it. But Suzanne, do you want to talk any bit about how you got some resources, maybe some general bits about that?
Sure. As I mentioned, Googling hands-on genetics middle school, I think may have gotten me this place called Serendip Studios that had just the most amazing activities, some just fabulous genetics activities. We made chromosome models out of socks. We took old socks and stuffed cotton or like batting into them and sewed them off and sewed them together, and those were our model chromosomes when we were doing our genetics. So I've found a lot of resources that way. There are a lot of places on the web that are, so like the Soil Science, no, I'm not going to remember the exact name, but the Soil Science Society or Soil Science Association, I think, has a whole website. And so there's soils for kids, and I think it's soils for teachers, and just a whole like 6 months of activities that you could do having to do with soil. There's Project Wet, there's middle school chemistry, I guess it's the American Chemical Society has a fabulous book. This is an older book now, called Wonder Science, which is the best. It has such great activities in it, but a lot of those activities actually that are in that book are on their website. If you look up middle school chemistry, I think it's middleschoolchemistry.com. So there are a lot of options like that to find. I was also able to, just in my own reading, identify people who I thought were really interesting thinkers or interesting scientists. So back to soil, I found something called Life in the Soil by, I think it's James Nardi. And so this is just a book that's for adults. And I read it. Admittedly, I didn't even read the entire thing, but I read enough of it and got lots of activity ideas out of that book. So just popular science or science books that are meant for the lay public are great places to go. And I found every topic I usually tried to find someone, some scientist or a writer or someone who I liked, who I could read, and that would help me to internalize stuff and then turn it into projects for the kids. I think I mentioned in a previous webinar that I really like Priscilla Spears, who is a person who provides material for Montessori teachers, and she has some just fabulous ideas, including the Tree of Life that Gary talked a little bit about, which was the great big poster with all 5 kingdoms and the relationships between those, and then we had pictures. But she has lots of other materials too, and we used a lot of her stuff from biospheres to atoms, plant lessons. So a lot of her materials were inspirations. And then another category is just traditional textbooks. So we as homeschoolers now have a great ability to access some materials that are for schools. So for example, Houghton Mifflin offers homeschool packages now. So like one person in the group could get a homeschool package for a high school textbook that really comes with all the teacher materials, lab manuals and very detailed laboratory procedures with safety information and all that. Now, when you're getting into that, you're getting into some more advanced labs, and that's when you're going to probably need to purchase some materials. But that's, I'm talking for high school level that's what I ended up using eventually at the high school level. And obviously we can't do all of them, but I mean, for like when I taught biology, there were 14 different labs, it seemed like, for every chapter. And so a lot of them weren't doable for us, but a lot of them were doable.
I have one other topic that I just thought of that some people, and maybe it's a little bit more sensitive topic, some people worry about homeschooler science because they have an image that homeschoolers maybe like don't believe in evolution. Yes, we just say that. And when my kids were applying, the two kids that are in college now were applying to colleges, that was a concern from some of the colleges that they needed to prove that they had done science. And so Edie took one of the extra SAT tests to prove that she had done science. So I don't know if you have any comments about that, Suzanne, in terms of picking materials. I know you've thought about this. And I mean, really, we're here to debunk the myth that homeschoolers don't believe in evolution. Homeschoolers are a wide range of people. And there some homeschoolers for that might be the case, homeschooling groups, but we certainly were homeschooling groups that went on traditional science teaching. So you want to say something, Suzanne?
Yeah, I do. I think it is important when choosing science curricula or science materials that you pay attention to how certain issues, evolution is one of them, geologic history and age of the earth is another, and I would say climate change would be what I would call the third of the ones that I look at. I'll go ahead and say that I'm a believer in theistic evolution, so I have a very strong value in my religious beliefs and faith absolutely allow for me to teach and to teach evolution, and I believe it's really important to teach kids about evolution. And there are many homeschool materials out there, and I would say that some of them are the homeschool textbooks that teach creationism and sort of try to debunk evolution. Those are not the textbooks that I choose to use. So I do think it's important that people know that issue's out there and that that's something to look at as you choose a material to homeschool. There are Christian science materials that say don't ascribe to a young earth philosophy that are very strongly encouraging people to understand that climate change is human influenced and that there's things that we can do about it. So I don't want to put that blanket out there that all Christian textbooks have a certain approach on these issues, but it's something that people need to look at.
I might just chime in that in terms of evolution, from my own background in middle school and high school, I had nothing almost in both parochial and public schools, and the materials I think that Suzanne brought to Science Club were very thorough and very I think pretty advanced by the time the kids were done with their stuff. They got a lot of really good, solid foundations in what evolution as a theory, as a practice in science, what it really was. And my kids at least were really able to think in terms of what evolution is. And it was really heartening to see that, and especially compared to what I got growing up in just regular schools. It was a really good thing.
I also want to say that some homeschool materials are worldview neutral or evolution neutral, so they just sort of don't treat that topic. So I just wanted to mention that there is that category also out there for when you're looking for homeschool like curricula. That's one thing to look at. A couple other, well, I at least want to mention one more resource because I just found it and I'm pretty excited about it. It's called Science Buddies. I think it's sciencebuddies.com, and there are a lot of activities and experiments on there. And I even had my daughter take a little test. They have a topic selection wizard or something wizard where you go and you answer about 20 questions about things that you like and what your grade level is, and then they spit back out 50 experiments or activities that you might like, some of which are good for just how, you just need household, you need like clothespins or straws or things that you might either have around the house or easily get at the grocery store. Some of them are tied to homeschool or other material providers like homeschool, home science tools, or I think it's hometrainingtools.com. And so some of them have kits that you have to purchase to do. So there's a wide variety of activities, and I'm pretty excited about exploring that in the future. They have a great balance of the activities sort of tell you what to do at first so you get enough help in figuring out how to do it, but then they also give you a lot of room to explore, make it your own, even set up something that is an experiment that would be, say, like a science fair worthy project. So great balance, and I'm excited to try those out.
I think when you're picking your activities, one of the things that I've done when we've done science here at home is that I'll just look through a book, and if it looks too complex, I might just skip through that and just find the ones that look like, okay, I have these materials or these I can substitute and I'm going to do this. And just start out with the things that you have and that look easy. And don't worry about some of those that are more complex or have things that you don't have in your home. At least first, when you're doing this, you don't need to get overwhelmed at what's out there. You pick things that you're interested in and that look like that you could do them and be successful with them, and then just go from there.
Yeah, I guess I would just throw in that uh, I we used to have a lot of library books around with activities, and I would just always look for something to do when the kids were getting bored, just some short activity to get them engaged in almost anything, just to get the idea that being active, doing something, is a step towards something new, and I think trying to plan out a whole science curriculum might seem overwhelming, whereas just starting to do stuff and then later looking back and saying, okay, so what haven't we covered, and trying to fill in the gaps later might be a good approach to get going if you're feeling like it's all too much. Just taking some small steps is a great way to go.
Right, and when you do that, and like we said, after you've done that, then when you look back, and then you can think about what you've done, it's almost every time I've done that and looked back at what I've done over the last week or the month or the last year, I feel a lot better than at the moment. A lot of times in the moment, I'm like, oh, in the day, I'm like, oh, what did we do today? But literally almost every time that I've looked back, I felt really good. When I've listed all the things, when I really think about all the things and all the things that you consider school and all the things that you can consider science. I mean, taking your kids outside, making sure your kids get outside, kicking them outside and making them be outside is so much science. Or making them help you cook a meal, or fix bikes. I made the other day, Mishek was here, our oldest, before he went to school, and he was fixing our bikes. And I said, Finian, you have to be there fixing them with him. Because I didn't call it science, but that certainly is what it was, a very practical science. So being all those things and just looking back. So I can look back and I can say that's one of the things we did. And so that always feels good to me.
I have to say that I went back and looked at 3 portfolios, and it's just amazing how much stuff we covered. If you look at a whole year of science club, it's incredible. I'm just so I want to homeschool kids again. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize your point, Ollie, that I think it's easy to get discouraged in the moment or in the day and think, oh, I'm not doing enough. And when you look back, there's somehow, in retrospect, you're able to just have that perspective of how much you learned, how much kids remember, how much they noticed about things that were small. I have an image of long, long ago, someone having just like an empty coffee can or something with some paper on the top, or maybe it was plastic wrap stretched over the top with a rubber band around it and a few just tiny little pieces of paper on it, and then they blasted a speaker right next to it, and we watched the paper jump up and down on the, I guess, the sort of drum surface. And what we learned about sound waves from just watching that is, it's almost like it, because of the experiences that we had, because it was with friends and it was social, and because we placed so much attention on it, I think that later on, when our kids are learning about sound waves, they've got something to go back to in their mind, and so the experience almost gets bigger because we remember it so many times, and that's becomes part of us and becomes part of our model about thinking about sound and sound waves, even though honestly we did that activity one time for 20 minutes about 10 years ago, right? And it's still in my mind and still in my kids' minds.
Yeah, I can think of it. No, we mentioned some activities in the last one, but another one was the bee activity in your backyard, Suzanne. We're studying about bees and probably about bee colonies. And then you gave everybody, whoever's doing that, a different role. And so some of the worker bees or the queen bee or the male bees. And my kids, that has stuck with them. They had so much fun because you're like, they had to pull maybe dead bees out of the hive or something. And
Yeah.
that day really stuck with them. I can still visualize it. That was a lot of fun. Just another one of those things that, just like you said, it's gonna stick with them. And then when they get into high school or even into college science, that's there. That seed is already planted in them. Eating dead bugs would be another one. We roasted bugs. That was that's never going to be forgotten. And putting them in brownies, I think that was it. I don't think I tasted. I'm not sure, but most people did. Those are just some of those many activities that they may seem little and insignificant, but they really do make a difference, and in the kids' learning.
I just have to throw out one more example of how it's helpful for us to keep our eyes open too when we might actually learn something. I just remember this time when my youngest was was dealing with Halloween candy, and we were taking Skittles and dropping them into um, a bowl of water just to see how they would dissolve and what would happen over time. And and that was a fun activity, and we were going with it. And then she said, what if we drop these in? And she held up some plastic beads. And I thought, oh, nothing's going to happen. You're going to drop them in the water. They're just going to float around and nothing's going to happen. She said, well, I want to try. And so we cleaned out the bowl, put new water in it. She dropped them in, and we watched it for quite a while, and nothing happened. And then we came back later, and they were all clustered together in the middle of the bowl. And thought, well, that's kind of weird. And we mixed them up and we came back later and they were all clustered together in the middle of the bowl. And they kept doing that. And for me, I was like, why is that happening? That just is so, that was counterintuitive. I just thought they would just kind of randomly float around. And it kind of pushed me a little ways to think about, well, what is plastic? And maybe it's the polar aspects of plastic or the whatever it was. It got me thinking, and it was my 5-year-old daughter that kind of pushed me to think a little bit more. It was great.
I mean, that is one of the biggest benefits to homeschooling is how much I have learned that whatever was lacking in my education or that I just didn't retain, I've got to learn so much. And you know, I do the literature, which we'll talk about later. I've read so many classic, wonderful books, and doing this homeschooling has allowed me to do that, to spend the time. I don't, you know, would I have spent the time reading Uncle Tom's Cabin or To Kill a Mockingbird? Maybe I would have, but having a purpose, that reading it with these middle and high schoolers has given me a purpose to doing that, and so many other things. It's enriched my life through my kids, but also just for myself too, and my learning and my engagement with life has been totally enhanced by this homeschooling and by this collaborative homeschooling we've done together, that our families, along with many other families, have really coalesced together. Our kids have lifetime friendships, literally lifetime, that they met each other. Some of them from the moment they were born, they have known each other, and which is so special. And creating that community, I think, is just a real essential part of life. And so glad that you guys have been along for the ride, and that hopefully we keep doing it. We'll talk a little bit more of how we've extended this, our families going on camping trips together and gardening together and just doing other things as our kids get older to keep ourselves connected. It's just been real, it has been lovely, and hopefully will continue to be an important part of our lives, this collaborative homeschooling that we've done together. Thanks, you guys, for joining another day. And
Thank you. Thanks for organizing this. This has been a lot of fun.
thanks for joining us for our talk about collaboratively homeschooling for science. We hope we've inspired you a little bit to just try some science activities. You know, you don't have to have it all planned out. Just finding some things that you're interested in, things that you think your kids might be interested in, and just trying those activities. Because all of science, all of homeschooling, all of parenting is just trial and error. You see what works, and then you try something the next day, and you see what works, and you go from there. We'll talk more about more homeschooling activities and more about our experiences with homeschooling in the future. Have a great day. Blessings to you and your family. See you later.